We make our way to Logan Airport by using the commuter rail from Providence to South Station and the Silver Line bus from South Station to Logan. It works perfectly and the trip is smooth and uneventful. I nod off briefly on the train. I find that if I let my mind wander, close my eyes, and just dream while awake, sleep will often come quickly, and my waking dreams become sleeping dreams. Increasingly, I find little difference between the two. Last night, I dreamed of my old school and found myself alone in my childhood home, wishing for company in my sleep. The walls were broken and everyone was gone. But I digress. South Station, a place that has been a second home to me for as long as I have commuted to Boston for work, 24 years. It hasn't changed, not even slightly, although it's been 6 months since last I was there. Arriving to the airport, we breeze through security and find our gate. I'm drinking my airport beverage, Coke and Jägermeister. Well, here we are, gate E7, waiting to board an Iberia Airlines flight to Barcelona. We get on the plane without a hitch, and the flight is fine, but there are no meals, no beverages, nothing. Unless you have pre-ordered something, the flight attendants behave as if you don't exist. But at least they deliver us to Barcelona alive. On the first day, we roam the streets and find Barcelona as expected, a sensory wonderland. After roaming, we wind up in a club called Jamboree, where the singer is a soul music genius named Clarence Becker. It turns out he's the guy with dreads who sings in the alley in the Playing for Change version of Stand By Me. His musicality is straight from his heart, and he simply blows our minds. One of the best performers I've seen in a long time. A good way to start the musical program of our trip. When he does the song Creep, it brings tears to my eyes. He really means it. Vika is crying too. She thinks he's written this song about himself. Later we stop for falafel and meet an Armenian guy who's made Barcelona his home. He speaks to us in Russian, Spanish, and English. We have a great conversation. The next morning, we walk to 2 museums, a museum of chocolate, sculptures made of chocolate, and the best hot chocolate we've ever had, literally melted chocolate in a cup, and a museum of contemporary art. Fantastic. Banksy and Kaws and Dali, and incredibly immersive digital installations. Lunch follows, spicy potatoes, and more shopping. A spree. I buy 2 hats and sunglasses. Lovely. We walk to the waterfront, and we're tempted to take a water tour on a boat that features jazz and drinks. It feels like a tourist trap, so we don't, and I'm glad. I think it was the right choice. After a short break, it is back out to walk to Palau de Música for a concert of guitar virtuosity and flamenco dance. The Palau itself is astounding, a gloriously eclectic architectural wonder. Actually, although their virtuosity is undeniable, the concert ultimately leaves me cold. For an encore, they all gather on a single guitar. One guy plays it as percussion, another sounds the bass line, the third picks out the chords, and the fourth fellow produces the melody to Michael Jackson's Billie Jean. It's nothing more than a cheap parlor trick and leaves me unimpressed. It seems a bit condescending. The best thing about the concert for me is the fantastic setting. The next day, after a lavish breakfast in the catacombs of our hotel, we visit a Picasso museum. How one man could have been so prolific is beyond me. Then we take the metro to a station from which we make a long uphill pilgrimage through the ancient streets, up steep hills, to the architect Antonio Gaudi's Park Güell, only to find it closed for the day. The walk is hot and grueling, but it's a good way to experience other parts of the city. From there, we take a metro to Gaudi's famously surreal cathedral Sagrada Familia. Impossible to describe. We tour the interior and take an elevator to the highest point of the towers and experience parts of this amazing place, ornaments of fruit, breathtaking views of the city, and truly visionary architectural design. We descend 504 steps on a long spiral snail-like staircase. We have lunch, or is it dinner? At a Chinese place where I have pizza that is excellent. For a moment, I am transported to my childhood dream of the perfect pizza of Jolly Charlie's amusement park. Vika is not fond of pizza and always orders something else. This evening, there is a concert featuring a youth chorus from Phoenix, Arizona, in the crypt of Sagrada Familia. 2 groups, young kids and teenagers. Both are great. In the kids group, there's a little girl who looks so transported by the sound they are making, I swear she's surrounded by an aura. When they sing early modal polyphony, it brings tears to my eyes. With Vika in charge, vacations are not wasted on rest. Back to the hotel, some sleep. The next day we walk to l'Arc de Triomphe for one last Barcelona experience and set off to the train station to rent our car for the next leg of our journey to Valencia. At the car rental agency in Barcelona, we meet our first obstacle. Even though Vika has made a reservation in advance, When we try to rent the car, we're told we need an international driver's permit, something that can only be obtained in our home state. What? We were never told this when making the reservation online and have never needed one in the past. But the guy insists that by clicking agree online, we have agreed to this stipulation. He refunds the charges, supposedly, we'll see, and discloses that not all agencies enforce this rule, and the one just further down the line might give us a car. We try, and indeed they do not require this elusive permit, but all they have available is an exorbitantly priced BMW. No thank you. So we switch to plan B. We decide to take a train to Valencia, which makes sense, since here we are at the train station anyway. With the number in hand, we wait our turn at the ticket window, only to decide the cost of the train is also prohibitive. It's more to just get to Valencia by train than the price of the entire original travel plan via rented car. So we pivot to plan C, bus. We take the metro back to l'Arc de Triomphe and the bus station, somewhat shabby, but aren't they all, and soon we're on a bus en route to Valencia, where we will try again to rent a car. There's no bathroom on the bus and no rest stop in the 4-hour drive, but I'm immersed in the second Joyce Carol Oates book of the trip, an early one titled Childwalled, and it keeps me distracted enough that the non-stop express causes no problems. The trip is a bit of a blur for me at this point. On arriving to Valencia, I recall walking for 25 minutes from the bus station to our hotel, dragging our backpacks and wheeling our carry-ons along the hot, late afternoon city streets. The city is asleep, and it's not making a strong impression just yet. As evening approaches, as with all our Andalusian destinations, the city rises from dreams and becomes very much alive. When we find the hotel via Vika's masterful cell phone navigation, our phones are fully functional because we have purchased temporary Euro plans via Vodafone. You pop in a new SIM card and you have a new phone number and voila, everything works as normal. Thank the gods of travel for the GPS capabilities of the cell phone, as we have little to no trouble navigating the unfamiliar streets and alleys. We arrive at the hotel so late we find it locked and deserted, a moment of truth, until Vika finds the phone number and calls it and is given the code to open the door. Her fluency in Spanish comes to the rescue again, although most everyone speaks more than enough English. Once inside, we find our room number and key and are able to rest a bit before heading out to explore. There is a huge square, restaurants and cafes everywhere, people milling about, street musicians, entertainers in giant character suits, Pokemon, a giant blue monster to entertain the kids, and me. We have a beer and a snack and head back to the room to crash. I noticed that the culture of beer fetishism, the microbreweries and exotic hoppy IPAs of US beer culture, have not hit Spain or Portugal. Dos cervezas por favor gets you 2 beers for 2 to 4 euros max, for a tall glass. End of story. No one asks you what kind, you get the home brew. In Spain, it's called Victoria. In Portugal, Sagres. And always cheap. In fact, everything seems quite inexpensive, but maybe I just don't understand the euros to dollars conversion. Well, selective ignorance is a form of wisdom. The next morning, after a fine European breakfast of croissants and cheese, and yogurt and fruit and coffee, and if you like eating dead animals, all sorts of ham and other meats, and baked beans and eggs, and excellent fresh orange juice, little wonder we're gaining weight. After all this, we visit the famous farmers market, Mercat Central. The marketplace is row upon row of food and craft items. People's eating habits are, well, a matter of taste, so I will restrain myself from the judgment of people who prefer their main course, finned, feathered, or furred, still staring at them up from the plate. Then to the Cathedral of Valencia, which claims to house the actual Holy Grail. I find cathedrals fascinating. In Valencia, it is curated as a museum with extensive exhibits, including a trip into underground catacombs where human remains are embedded in the earth. It is like a cemetery as seen from below, a subterranean tour of a burial ground. Whose bones are these? A man? A woman? A child? How did they live? What stories would they tell? The bones are a language lost to time. I love religious art, of any faith or denomination. The fact that faith and spirituality can lead to music, impossible architectures, and sheer artistry throughout the ages is proof of something transcendent. Cynics will argue that the cathedrals, like the pyramids, were built by slaves and indentured servants of perverted popes in golden robes who used doctrines of humility and poverty to ensure their power and wealth. I'm sure this is true. But it's also true that they employed hundreds of thousands of craftsmen and artisans, generations of skilled and unskilled laborers to construct edifices of grace and enduring beauty. Throughout our trip, we experienced religious and secular architecture that combined the belief systems of Christian and Islamic faith in a synthesis of aesthetic style and metaphysics. Sure, I am ignoring the horrors of the Crusades, Inquisitions, bloodshed, and misery, but it is in the arts that we find the finer things of humankind, all of which were in prominent abundance throughout our trip through Andalusia. And besides, there is a glorious morbidity to the Catholic faith. One of the side altars displays the relic of St. Vincent, his entire arm, desiccated as leather, on full display in a glass case. It returns to me in my dreams that evening. We have dinner in a great little Italian restaurant. We go back to our hotel and walk back to the bus station to a big, more modern hotel where we have another beer and fruit. We had to change hotels because of the car screw-up. We went to a big fancy mall, but they all look alike, and we look like bums. The next day, after breakfast, we take a taxi to the train station to pick up a car. This time, with no questions asked, we are handed the keys to a spiffy Citroën and are on the first leg of our longest drive of the trip. The evening before, we had calculated it as around 8 hours from Valencia to Alhambra, a Moorish compound of gardens and palaces in Granada, and from there onward to Malaga. I had some reservations, but the way is clear, the road's excellent, and the car quick. We stop for gas and buy excellent bread and cheese, and are in our element, free, on the road, on our own itinerary, and eating good bread and cheese. All that's missing is a bottle of wine, but with an 8-hour drive ahead of us, I opt for a Coke. It turns out to be a pleasant 6-hour drive. At this point, I should tell you of a quite incredible coincidence. As we are planning this trip back home, our son Ilya tells us that he too is planning to travel in Europe. Incredibly, it happens that his trip will coincide with our own. But even more unlikely, it turns out that his destination is also southern Spain, and his route through Spain will intersect with our own. And although we make no advance arrangements to bring it about, we can rendezvous in Malaga and have the opportunity to spend a day with Ilya and his friend Yona, a young man we've known since he was a child. Amazing. As we drive toward Alhambra in our quick and agile 6-speed Citroën, we are looking forward to seeing them in Malaga tomorrow. After a smooth and pleasant drive through the fantastic landscape of the Sierra Nevada mountains of Andalusia, we arrive at Alhambra. This is a city within a city of gardens, palaces, and fortresses, courtyards built by the Moors starting in the 1st century AD, all located within the Spanish town of Granada. It is considered one of the wonders of the world. Its history is long and storied. It was captured by Christian crusaders but never destroyed. Major developments in the history of Europe have taken place within the many walls of this extensive complex, once the home of the sultans, their wives, and concubines. Alhambra means the red. Because Islamic faith prohibits the depiction of the human form, the architecture and ornamentation is completely unlike that of a Christian cathedral. There are no statues or paintings of humans, no saints or crucifixes. Instead, the buildings are adorned with complex mathematical symmetries, so complicated they defy comprehension. Fantastic repeating geometries of tiled surfaces that are found throughout Spain reach a culmination here. Calligraphy, or the writing of the caliphs, are mantras to the glories of Islamic faith and are everywhere. The proportions of gardens, courtyards, and fountains are all designed to bring about a sense of contemplation, and they do. It is meant to be a spiritual paradise. Absent is the Christian morbidity. Vivid is the evidence that if there is indeed a God, surely she must be a mathematician. Another coincidence is the fact that Bob Dylan had performed in one of the many amphitheaters just 2 nights previous to our visit. We have a pre-arranged guided tour that lasts for over 2 hours. Our tour guide is humorous, but doesn't seem particularly knowledgeable and tends to deflect questions he decides are not relevant to the agenda of his guidance. But nothing can detract from the splendor of Alhambra. Time and time again, on this visit as on our previous journeys, I am struck by the seemingly impossible achievements of men and women inspired by faith in higher purpose. As the tour concludes, we return to the car and are back on the road to Malaga. The sun sets late and casts lengthening shadows on the mountainous countryside as another 3 hours pass and we enter the city. After some minor tribulation, we find the hotel, park the car, and check in. Tired, perhaps, but safe and feeling well. Tomorrow, our plan is to meet Ilya and Yona. We begin the day in the usual way, with breakfast and coffee, and walk to the dock area, where a street musician sings passionate arias, waving his arms and pouring his heart and soul into his unaccompanied song. I drop €1 into his hat. Our policy is to tip street musicians, and see he is drenched in sweat, utterly committed to his performance. It is very beautiful. There is a thin line between a full commitment to art and a partial descent into madness, and he seems on the edge. Ilya arrives, followed soon after by his friend Yona. Together we tour a massive castle, slowly ascending higher and higher ramparts until the very last stage, which requires the ticket stub from the entrance gate. Of course, I've misplaced it. Vika starts scolding pretty vigorously, and it threatens to embarrass both Ilya and Yona, but I deflect it in my usual way, cluelessness and laughing it off. Situation rescued. We all go for lunch, and after much indecision, which comes close to souring the situation once again, Ilya is a lot like me, with a mood that can turn on a dime when faced with things he finds petty or irrelevant. Things like, where do we eat in a town teeming with restaurants and cafes? But I have evolved a reliable coping mechanism. I just move inwardly to my zone, a mental laboratory where my spiritual guides, the actress, chanteuse Cher, and the television actor David Jansen, it's a long story, keep me calm until the moment has passed. It's why I rarely take initiative. I let events unfold. They will anyway. Stillness is a form of action. Detachment is a source of sanity. In this case, however, I do act and just choose a spot for lunch. As always, my preference would be pizza, but out of consideration, my choice is geared toward the more sophisticated palates of my companions, where I still can find my go-to option of beer and spicy potatoes there on the menu. After lunch, we say our farewells to Ilya and Yona and walk back to the hotel for a rest. In the evening, we walk to a small club for a flamenco performance. It is a tiny venue, and we are seated at a table at the foot of the stage. A guitarist, a singer, and 2 dancers, male and female, enter to perform a passionate set of improvisations with all the soul I found lacking in our previous concert at the Palais de Música in Barcelona.
eres un cobarde. Hay tanto daño estás haciendo. Hay que algún día vas a saber que me marché. Ay, en la isla Baleares se me perdieron las barcatas. Ay, como yo no las encuentre, se va a guiar una sola gavata. Ay, en la isla Baleares se me perdieron mis barcatas.
In the world of so many varied approaches to guitar, for me, flamenco stands out. There are no little stools, no proper seating position. It's all skill, passion, inspiration, rhythmic intensity, and improvisational genius. You sense the presence of history, of music passed directly from generation to generation. Wow! We returned to the hotel by way of the main square, still alive with beautiful people from all over the world. People linger over wine and beer in outdoor cafes. In fact, sometimes getting the check can be a challenge since the waitstaff is in no rush to move you out and assume you are there to stay for hours. Everywhere there is a sense of style, street art and graffiti, even Shepard Fairey's Andre the Giant logos, originally a reference without a referent, are commonplace, a touch of Providence, Rhode Island in the heart of old Europe. The next day, we retrieved the car and set out for the city of Ronda. It's not in our original itinerary, but Ilya and Yona explored there and said it is a must-see. And since it is on our way to Sevilla, why not? The way to Ronda is a 90-minute drive through gorgeous hills and farmlands, through fields of olive trees, vineyards, and sunflowers. When we arrive, we will park the car in a residential neighborhood and find a tiny cafe well off the tourist path. It's in places like these that you get a sense of real life in a Spanish town. It may seem a stretch, but in Spain, as well as in Portugal, when I find myself in a real neighborhood where the local drunks are smoking cigarettes and muttering to themselves, and the laundromat is across the street, and the market is selling fish heads for soup, it's these places that transport me back to my hometown of Fall River, where people are similarly unpretentious and real. After a long walk and a bit of nerve-wracking navigational confusion, we will find our way to a long cobblestone pedestrian walkway lined with shops. I will spy something I've been on the lookout for days, a music store. I've been curious to investigate guitars here and just want to pick one up and play it. Vika spies a small ukulele-sized guitar and says, "Do you think this would fit in the backpack?" It is so small, it would certainly be easy to carry around if it had a case. Down from the wall and into my hands. It's actually pretty sweet. It's very tiny and not really super easy to play in a normal way, but close enough to a regular guitar to alleviate my guitar sickness. It's not at all expensive, and neither is a tiny soft case to fit it, and so, at Vika's urging, I walk out with the guitar purchased in Ronda, Spain. I will drive Vika to distraction with it for the rest of the trip. It's the first thing to be unpacked in every hotel room from this point on. It gets to the point where I have to go into the bathroom and shut the door to play it. So I do, sitting on the toilet like a little chair plunking away. Bathrooms have great acoustics, so it's not bad. Actually, with a bottle of wine for inspiration in our hotel in Sevilla, we will work up a new song for the band when we get home, Cat Stevens' Father and Son, a song with much personal resonance for me. So sometimes I am let out of the bathroom with my little guitar. Ronda is an ancient city built on a deep gorge traversed by a bridge that dates from the Roman period and is still very much in use today. The city has a storied history and has seen periods of Roman, Moorish, and Christian rule. The view into the gorge from the ancient bridge cannot be described in words or in photos, simply breathtaking. We have a beer in a small cafe overlooking the gorge as a street guitarist with the sweetest tone fills the air with music. Out from the case comes my little guitar, and I quietly jam with him from our table. My little guitar has a quiet voice, but the vibrations it sends directly to my heart are as healing as from a $10,000 guitar. I'm reminded of a YouTube clip Vika shared with me that shows a father playing an acoustic as his tiny infant naps directly on top of the curved body of the guitar, lulled to sleep by the vibrations of the sound. We want to complete our drive from Ronda to Sevilla, so we make our way back to the car, parked near a park in a residential neighborhood. We come across and chat with two beautiful cats in a neighborhood window and are soon on the road again. Arriving in Sevilla, we return the rented Citroën that has served us so well and jump through some hoops to get from the car rental drop-off at the train station to our hotel clear across town. We call an Uber, but either they can't find us or we can't find them. I have shit luck with Uber. It is really hot, 104 degrees hot. Vika is melting down and demanding I do something, but what? I suggest we take the metro. The station is right nearby, but it's an example of meaningless initiative because Vika is in charge of travel arrangements, so we take a taxi. But this is one of the more stressful moments of the trip. We have walked at least 6 miles in Ronda, have driven 300 miles to Sevilla, and now we are momentarily stranded with backpacks and carry-ons in glaring sun and 104-degree heat. Some volatility is to be expected. The cab ride is fine. Tipping is very optional in Spain, particularly in restaurants, but of course we tip the driver. He is a lifesaver. We check into our hotel and find a restaurant for an excellent dinner, where Vika finally has paella, and I a salad and some mushroom truffle croquettes. There's a table of loud Russian tourists, and, a little tipsy from the wine we're drinking, we imagine somehow conveying a protest of their presumptive support of war criminal Putin. We decide that so-called pure Russians look twisted, but maybe it's the wine talking. And anyway, doesn't anything supposedly pure seem somehow a little off? Consider the British royal family, or a purebred French poodle, compared to the healthy diversity of a nice mixed breed mutt. But maybe it's just the wine still talking. After a night of much-needed rest, we wake up to a rooftop breakfast overlooking the city, a marketplace, and the bus station conveniently located just across the street. Our first stop is the Museum of Fine Arts of Sevilla, a beautiful building with Moorish gardens, Baroque and classical paintings, a King Neptune's chariot of intricate silver drawn by a team of equine mermaids, and ornate carriages like custom cars from an age of impossibly rococo design, carrying cherubs, griffins, and chimeras. The collection of religious art is a dreamscape of pale crucifixions, decapitated saints, and wan, grieving Madonnas. I feel the stirrings of a not-so-latent Catholicism, and a few days later we'll discover that fate has planted a beautiful shirt patterned with images of Our Lady of Guadalupe in a vintage shop. I buy it, and it comes home with me. Then off to the cathedral, said to be the largest in the world. The cathedral is remarkable in every way, a massive complex, and a clear contender for the largest, if not the tallest, in the world. My fondness for religious art is growing with every experience of it. There will be more to come. We have a reservation at a museum of flamenco. The displays are interesting. There are even mechanical flamenco drum machines, wooden shoes that perform rhythmic patterns at the turn of a crank. But unfortunately, they're not working. This is followed by another fantastic performance. The intense afternoon heat drives us back to the hotel to cool off. But as Vika is fond to say, we did not come to Spain to lie around in the hotel. So in the evening we head out to another part of town to see an attraction of modernist architecture described as the largest wooden structure of its type. This honorarium seems perfectly plausible, since I would imagine it to be the only wooden structure of its type. Known colloquially as the mushroom or las setas, it is a gigantic amorphous creation that hovers aloft on hidden pylons and has all the makings of an alien craft. Very impressive it is, and a gathering place for friends, amorous young couples, and street musicians. We have a beer and hang out for a bit, but the night is still hot, and I do not resist a return to the coolness of our room. The next morning, we head out on foot and across the river to a museum of contemporary art. It's in a monastery. It is not quite open when we arrive, so we kill time in the shade of the gardens, listening to the sound of mourning doves, whose song is shaped exactly like their distant American relatives, though perhaps a semitone lower in pitch. The museum is now open, filled with genuinely fascinating exhibits, with an emphasis on the conceptual, surrounded by the exquisite architecture of the monastery. One such exhibit focuses on the human element of museum displays of funerary artifacts, like mummies and such, exploring the human element within the historical data. Another exhibit is about the systematic exploration of simple shapes and forms, repeated and reoriented into a complex design universe. It illustrates graphically how a single idea, made fractal through a lifetime of exhaustive investigation, will yield wonders beyond the imagination. Finally, I should mention the sound of birdsong coming from another room. "Check this out," says Vika. "What do you think it is?" It sounds for all the world like a very vocal bird. A parrot? I read the information display. It is a human language, a person speaking in whistles. Supposedly Zapotec in origin, although my quick subsequent research indicates perhaps otherwise. But still, I learned that such languages do indeed exist and serve the purpose of communication over long distance. Before crossing the river back to our hotel, we detour to a tall and imposing skyscraper that marks a city center for shopping and restaurants. Our thinking is that we might have lunch there. The city center proves somewhat confusing, with all the restaurants located on one of 3 levels. It turns out to be a shopping mall experience like any other in any part of the multinational corporate world. Prices are notably higher, and although we managed to get a beer, we are unable to attract any further attention from our waiter. We leave the correct change on the table and head for the door. We have a reservation at the Casa de Guitarra, a venue featuring a history of flamenco and a truly impressive collection of rare and valuable Spanish classical guitars belonging to masters of the tradition. At the end of our tour, we take our seats for another ecstatic performance of music, costume, and dance. One of the dancers is having a bit of a wardrobe malfunction and turns her back to the audience and toward the guitarist seated behind her to make quick repairs. The story they tell in facial expression and body language is an unplanned comedy within the drama of the dance. Neither misses a step or a beat, and no one in the audience notices. It reminds me of the unspoken communication, a virtual telepathy that takes place when people are engaged in live performance. Our final evening in Spain. Tomorrow our plan is a quick breakfast and another lengthy bus trip to our final destination, Lisbon. The bus station is directly across from our hotel, but just to be sure we have no problems, we do a bit of reconnaissance to be certain of the bus schedule and departing gate. Our mission accomplished, we retire for the evening. The bus ride is long, but uneventful, and I'm weaning myself off of Joyce Carol Oates to the short stories of Flannery O'Connor. I'm reading on my phone, and I so prefer reading from a physical book that I'm distracted by my thoughts and end up writing a short story of my own as the bus snakes its way across Andalusia. Lisbon is a city of hills and cobblestone neighborhoods with stair-stepped alleys, electric streetcars, and narrow streets shared by pedestrians and cars. You have to watch your step. You can easily be run over by a tram, a car, or one of the little 3-wheeled cabs called tuk-tuks that ferry folks to and fro. We head straight to the Alfama neighborhood, the birthplace of Fado, the Portuguese music we have come to admire. Our guitarist friend Chris, himself a world traveler, has tipped us off to a particular venue, which we find, but it's closed. It's too early for things to get underway, but the neighborhood is adorned with colorful streamers, and booths are set up everywhere in alleys and streets for a Portuguese religious festival that carries me right back to my childhood and the 3-day festivals held at the Portuguese parish across from my dad's house. The parish is called Our Lady of Angels, and every night the place is jumping with live music, chouriço, bacalhau, malasadas, bingo, gambling, and dancing. We French Canadians might grouse about the late into the evening noise during the festival and how it takes over the entire street, but we also attend the festival like everyone else and secretly look forward to it. The Portuguese know how to throw a party. At the end of the festival, there's a parade, and the colorful statues of saints are paraded through the streets. The Alfama neighborhood reminds me of Fall River, older of course, but the spirit is the same. For the people of the city of my youth, this is the old country. We make the long climb up many stairs from the Alfama neighborhood back to our hotel. Lisbon is so beautiful, but we are road-weary and underslept, and when you're tired, everything can take on a certain shade. Vika is feeling slightly under the weather. Back at the hotel, she takes a COVID test, and thankfully, it's negative. She just has a bit of a cold, and we both need to rest. Nevertheless, we are searching for Fado performance and find what we are looking for in a small restaurant where the music is perfect. Tomorrow, we have a lot of plans. In the morning, we have breakfast and head straight to the fortress castle that looms high on a hill in the center of Lisbon. There was a devastating earthquake here in the 17th century that destroyed much of the city, but the castle of St. George stands intact. It is filled with archaeological artifacts, peacocks, a remarkable camera obscura using only natural light and mirrors to produce startling panoramas of the city. The views from the highest ramparts are breathtaking, and much of the morning is taken with our explorations. We have lunch and head back to the room for rest. It's quite hot here as well. Some rest is called for. I think we managed to fall asleep and wake up to some indecision as to how we will spend the evening. After some research and debate, we decide to take a fairly long walk out of the old part of the city to the Cinematheque, a museum of cinema that is screening a classic Fritz Lang film noir from 1947 titled Secret Behind the Door. It's a nice walk through a ritzy 5-star hotel Rolex watch neighborhood. I take over the navigational duties, and my phone leads us unerringly to our destination. I purchase 2 tickets to the 9:45 show, which leaves us with lots of time for dinner at a restaurant nearby. A Vladimir Putin lookalike sits at a table across the room. Could it be? Get me a steak knife. After dinner, back at the theater, we explore a collection of vintage film projectors and lighting instruments and start opening doors in search of the screening room, only to discover that the movie is shown outdoors in a courtyard full of patrons sitting at tables sipping drinks over dessert. How continental. It is a slightly chilly evening, so we sit close for warmth and watch this excellent psychological thriller over coffee and dessert, and wind up having one of the most pleasant and relaxing evenings of the entire trip. What fun. The walk back to the hotel is a tour of beautiful architecture, leading back to the old city. There are only 2 days left to the trip, and we want to make the most of them. Tomorrow we plan to go to the Museum of Contemporary Art, a museum of classical art, and a pre-arranged dinner concert of Fado music. The Museum of Contemporary Art gets off to a slow start. Vika feels it's not particularly contemporary, based more on modernism than anything truly of the moment. But I'm finding in the first exhibit of posters and illustration a synthesis of Art Nouveau and Art Deco design. There's a nice collection of early 20th century Portuguese magazine illustration. I've always been drawn to print design. An image intended for mass reproduction is free of the weight of the canvas. Not one, but many, is a very different aesthetic economy than this one and only truly this one. The magazine image is playful and free, not painterly, and the times of these illustrator artists are populated with geometric women, bobbed haircuts, and plush hats, riding bicycles and smoking cigarettes in long holders. Sexy and fun. The lines are both curved and angular, and the energy of movement is the stuff of futurism. Modernism is best expressed in the architecture of fashion design, and the modernist woman is designed for speed. The rest of the museum unfolds in ways more specifically contemporary, but never gives itself over to digital installation or multimedia display. The bulk of the exhibit is focused on contemporary painters of Moroccan descent, whose work finds expression in ingenious alchemies of nature and abstraction. Avoiding, for the most part, the human figure, these artists are using color, form, pattern, and natural objects of nature to illuminate the visual spiritual dimension. The works all share a certain vibrancy of color and Mediterranean light. Beautiful. Immediately, we embark on our next excursion, a somewhat harrowing walk along commuter rail tracks to a museum of traditional art, which counts among its collection The Temptation of St. Anthony, an important painting by the Dutch painter Hieronymus Bosch, one of the most famous and bizarre painters of religious art. The walk takes us out of the old part of town and into residential areas, also old, but with a dynamic not of visitors and tourists, but more of residents and day-to-day work. It is hot, and the walkway is a narrow strip between traffic on the right and rail tracks on the left. Once again, I've assumed the role of chief navigator and get us there without a hitch. I'm getting better at this. At first, I find the interface of the Maps application very confusing, but it's starting to make sense to me now, and it really is remarkable. With your phone working and connected, you can navigate the most complicated streets and alleys and narrow passages. We reach the museum. It is an enormous collection of painting, furniture, ceramics, and metalworks from every classical period and from every part of Europe. I never tire of religious painting and find myself reveling in gallery after gallery of the Virgin Mary ascending UFO-like into the clouds, crucifixion scenes, nativity scenes, and all the saints in various stages of life and martyred death. I prefer classical and Renaissance painterly realism than any modern attempts at the same. Even Picasso's early realist works, masterpieces as they are, do not compare to the religious painters from the 12th to the 17th century. The modernists, and certainly the postmodernists, paint with an awareness of their place in the history of their movement. The medieval, classical, and Renaissance painters of religious art painted for the glory of their patrons, both of this world and the next. The light of these paintings is not earthly. In the eyes of the models, there shines a humanity. This person lived. This beautiful girl laughed and joked and sat for the artist, united in a cause to glorify the Mother of God. This bleeding man, this punctured saint, they all lived. Suddenly, there is Bosch. There are no words to describe the triptych of the Temptation of St. Anthony. It is an epic rendering of heaven, hell, and all things in between. The Bosch world is filled with hallucinatory monsters, parodies of bloated priests, nightmare eggs, and hybrid serpents with heads of corpses and arrows jutting from their bums. Virginal ladies hitch rides on flying fish, and scheming cardinals make secret deals with saber-toothed rats. Distant cities are aflame, while Jesus ponders his own crucifixion deep within the catacombs of delusion. Off to the side, St. Anthony, impassive within the seething torrent of nightmare imagery. It is not a painting to be trifled with. I recall reading a book many years ago titled The Day of St. Anthony's Fire by John Fuller that tells the apparently true story of an entire village in France gone mad in hellish hallucination, the result of a psychotropic substance in the flour of their bread. His work is a guiding light toward the surreal and the fantastic, as evocations of the ineffable. The language of transcendence will appear as madness to those who are sane. After a hotel catnap, we head to the Alfama for a fado and dinner experience. It starts off very touristy. Most, if not all, the guests are American. Our table neighbors are from Boston, and the husband is in the music tech business, which leads to much tedious conversation. But the wine and beer are flowing. The food is not great, but it's edible. Finally, the music begins. The trio, Spanish guitar, Portuguese guitar, and singer, are wonderful. The Portuguese guitarist, not older than 22, is a genuine virtuoso. The set comes to an end. Fado sets are quite short, and all the Americans get up and leave. We stay, knowing there's more to come. The place fills with locals and the music starts up again, and finally we find what we have been looking for, real Fado in the place of its origin. We stay for 2 more sets, and after too much wine and too much beer, we pick our way back up the stairs and alleys to the lower part of the old town and our hotel to crash. Tomorrow, Wednesday, is the last day of our trip. In the morning, Vika is not up to breakfast, so I go down by myself. The waitress asks me for our room number. Throughout this trip, I've tried to diffuse the hubris of speaking English to the citizens of a non-English speaking country by prefacing everything I say with, "I'm sorry, but I can only speak English." This gives people an invitation to speak English because it seems everyone to varying extent can, but diffuses the presumption that they should or must or are expected to just because I'm not fluent in their native tongue. The waitress responds, "No, I am sorry because my English is very bad." I say, "Well, already your English is much better than my Portuguese. I only know 2 things, obrigado and vá pra casa." Obrigado means thank you, and vá pra casa means go home. Now I worry that I may have just said something terrible, because vá pra casa, as I recall from my youth, is something that can be insulting. Not just go home, but more like go home and fuck yourself. She says, "Very good, your Portuguese is excellent." I say, "I think vá pra casa means go home, yes?" Just to be sure. "Yes," she says, "it means go home." Luckily, in Lisbon, it's a neutral phrase. Well, it is a pleasant exchange. Then Hitler walks into the dining area and sits at a table near me. I swear this guy is Hitler. He could certainly play him in a movie. Pig-faced and unpleasant in every way. As Joni Mitchell says, he leeches the air right out of the room. He's shaved his Charlie Chaplin mustache, but he's not fooling me. I leave Hitler with the scrambled eggs and retrieve Vika, and we head out toward the docks. We visit a museum of storytelling. It's not all that great until the very last part, when they screen a surround film that graphically depicts the earthquake that destroyed much of the city in 1755 and the subsequent rebuilding that took place. The film is graphic enough that there are warning signs, not for sensitive viewers. It is mild by slasher film standards, but the earthquake was a cataclysmic event. Vika is determined to take a ride on one of the electric streetcars, specifically the iconic one, number 28, that winds through the hilly maze of the old city. As we wait for the tram, I notice a beautiful old shop across the street, the very essence of Art Nouveau design. It is a design my dreams are often made of, all curves and graceful shapes, a light blue nature form rendered in wood and plaster. I feel that this site, this random discovery in a city of so much to discover, is given to me as the memory of Lisbon to take home. The tram arrives and takes us on a crowded roller coaster through the streets we've walked. The sights are familiar, but the herky-jerky pacing of the streetcar gives a manic, tumbling, almost comic effect to the experience. We are nearing the end of the trip, and we know it. We are ready to go home, but not quite ready to leave. We try to squeeze one more Fado experience in, but it doesn't go well, and we wind up feeling a bit ripped off by very mediocre food and a €15 charge for 15 minutes of music. No point in dwelling on it. For me, the last event is not this, but my discovery of the sky blue Art Nouveau shop just a couple of hours before. Back to the hotel, and up early for breakfast. Our cab to the airport is late, so we share a cab with a couple from Champaign, Illinois, who had just been in Seville. I make conversation. Me. So did you guys visit the cathedral in Seville? Amazing, right? She. No. Actually, once you've seen one cathedral, you've seen them all, don't you think? Me. How about the highways here? So well designed. Signage is clear. The overall infrastructure is really something, huh? He. Yeah. Well, they pay enough taxes. It ought to be. We arrive to the airport, check in, get on the plane. I watch a documentary on the Cape Verde singer Cesaria Evora. Remarkable. We approach Boston. Scary. We land. We are alive. We take the subway to South Station, my second home. We take the commuter rail to Providence. Ilya, who's back home, picks us up at the train station and delivers us to the Purple House on Summit. Bella, our miscreant mountain lion cat, appears, purrs, and bites me. We're back.